Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and AP English, and we now turn in our study of the Iliad to Book 22. Now, from the very beginning of our comments on the Iliad, I promised you that this was where we were headed. If the Odyssey is the story of Odysseus' work to get back to Ithaca, the reading of the Iliad is for us to get to Book 22. And because we've been promising about Book 22 for some time, it may seem a little bit anticlimactic when we finally get here that the fight between Achilles and Hector, and of course Hector's death, is going to be for us something maybe not as climactic as we would have assumed. But I'm going to try as best I can in our comments here to bring to you a sense of how everything that's happened in the Iliad is somehow subsumed here, right? After the quote-unquote silly book of Book 21, Achilles fighting Xanthus the river Scamander, right? After the gods boxing each other's ears and running off to Daddy Zeus to complain. Here, we have a really special book. A focus on two men, Achilles and Hector, who obviously for us are going to serve and stand as a certain kind of person. But we're going to have all kinds of things happening in Book 22. This will obviously be a return to Book 1, Achilles versus Agamemnon. Struggles have been a part of all of this Iliad poem. We're going to have a return to Book 3, where Paris will fight against Menelaus, and we think that the war maybe is over. We're going to have a return to Book 6, right, where Hector is with his wife, Andromache, as well as his son Astyanax, and that will be, in many ways, such an important part of our reading here, because Astyanax's name will actually be said out loud 2 times by Andromache right at the end of this book, after, of course, the death of Hector. Book 7, well, this is a return to Book 7, no question, where Ajax and Hector will fight. If you will, Achilles is going to take care of the business that Ajax could not take care of. This is a return, no question, a return to Book 9. Achilles' crisis of faith. He will go so far as to say, I could eat you, Hector, raw. Whoa. In other words, why do we have this unbelievable response to the death of Patroclus, one man, granted a close friend, but hello, the reason why Patroclus was fighting in the first place was because of Achilles' refusal to accept responsibility to help win the war. And yet, we'll have it here, right? Definitely this is the culmination of the longest day from books 11 through 18. No question, this is where it's all been leading us to. It's for sure a return to books 2, 4, 8, 14, 18, 21. The cunning gods, as they'll be given here, right? And of course, the question is, these gods, are they a blessing to have them on your side? That is to say, salvation. Or are they rather a curse, a distraction? Here, we'll see Athena will in the end take down Hector because she will outright lie to poor Hector, right? I say poor Hector, maybe not so poor. It's up to you. Here we have, as I said, 2 types of men represented. 2 types of motivation for living and for dying. Achilles, of course, choosing his destiny, and Hector, of course, defending his city and his family. We will meet his wife and hear about his son at the end of Book 21. Here we have one of, without question, the most read and certainly referenced passages of classical literature. I mean, think about all of the movies that end with a fight between 2 men or women, heroes. I mean, think about every superhero movie that you've seen in your lifetime. And here, of course, we will have the beginnings, the genesis of a lot of that. Here, in this book, we have the birth of so many epic battles to come. Odysseus and the suitors. Aeneas and pretty much everybody in Virgil's poem. We'll get there. Beowulf's 3 monsters of Grendel, Grendel's maw, and the dragon, all are born here. Gilgamesh and his many fights, along with Enkidu. Roland in his final sacrificial battle in Song of Roland. Arthur's, of course, meeting with Mordred at the end of the Arthurian motif, right? Mordred, his son. We've got Shakespeare's Macbeth against Macduff. We've got Shakespeare's Othello versus Iago. Basically, we have most of Shakespeare's great tragic plays born here. We've got metaphoric battle scenes. Think of it. Socrates against the Athenians in Plato's Apology. How about Job versus God in the Hebrew Old Testament of Job 38? We've got Krishna versus Arjuna in their conversation in the Bhagavad Gita, the Hindu scripture. We've got Christ versus Satan in Matthew 4. We've got Christ versus himself in Gethsemane and, of course, on the cross. We've got St. Augustine in his lust as he is struggling in Confessions. We have in Milton, of course, Satan versus God in Paradise Lost, and Satan versus Christ in Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. And of course, Samson Agonistes, Milton's great poem about Samson. In the 20th century, just to name 3 titles that we'll be playing with in AP English. We've got Joyce's Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, Stephen Dedalus versus the boys on the playground arguing who is the better poet, Tennyson or Byron. And of course, we've got as well in James Joyce's Portrait of the Artist, Stephen Dedalus versus the priest. Will you become a priest, will you not? Hemingway's Old Man in the Sea. I mean, think about it. The sea, the old man fighting the sea, fighting the fish. We've got Tolkien's, of course, greatest fight scenes. They're all born. They're all born right here, right? Since it's all here, I would argue, let's sit up and let's enjoy a central moment in the history of Western culture, shall we? Before, however, we proceed, let's remind ourselves of where we've been. If you haven't been following my lectures, hit learnstrong.net. Find yourself there down that left-hand side in the AP folder and find our lectures. In Book 1, of course, the Invocation of the Muse and Achilles versus Agamemnon. In Book 2, we've got Agamemnon's bad dream, as we say, where Zeus tells him, you will destroy the Trojans, and of course it's a complete lie. Now this notion of the gods deceiving and lying, we see it all the way through, culminating with what Athena does to Hector. It's brutal in Book 22. The catalog of the ships and the catalog of the chariots, of course, is a part of this, just to tell us how many people, men, women, are a part of this contest that we will qualify as a world contest for its day. In Book 3, of course, Paris versus Menelaus. We think that the war is over because Menelaus has defeated Paris, but no. Book 4, we've got Hera talking with Zeus, and the decision is made that the city of Troy must fall. Pandarus is convinced by Hera to do something idiotic like shoot an arrow at Menelaus. The war is back on. Book 5, we have Diomedes and his Aristeia. That's an important word for us, that notion of Aristeia. Type scene that is a battle scene where he, in the end, will wound both Aphrodite and Ares, the 2 gods. We're going to see, obviously, the culmination of Achilles' Aristeia and, of course, the end of Hector's Aristeia in Book 22. In Book 7, we have Ajax versus Hector, which is in many ways kind of a type scene to set up what's coming only there. Ajax and Hector draw, and you have the truce. In Book 8, we've got the famous scales of Zeus. We're going to see those scales again here. That is to say, the determination of who is jacked and who will live. In Book 8, it's the Trojans who will ascend, and Hector will have his day, knowing full well that by Book 22, those scales are going to tip differently by Book 22. In Book 9, Agamemnon has realized his problems. Nestor has told him, you got to get Achilles back into the fight, and he will send that famous embassy to Achilles. Achilles sitting outside of his tent, playing on his lyre, his harp. Songs of fallen heroes, we're told, with Patroclus over there listening quietly. Odysseus, Phinox, Ajax all offer Achilles the world from Agamemnon. He says no. I paused at the end of Book 9, and I called that review of Books 1 through 9 Achilles' Crisis of Faith. I think it's pivotal to the reading of Book 22 that we go back and remind ourselves of the comments that were made in that lecture. That Achilles, in the rejection of Team A, honor, Scooby Snacks, the world being offered to him, very much like Paris and the Judgment of Paris, had all that stuff offered to him. And he also, Achilles, rejects kleos, or glory. The notion that you got to do something in your life. What's the great line from the film Gladiator? What we do in life echoes in eternity. Achilles is like, I'm not sure I believe that either. And so he's kind of lost. which will explain, I think, why we have this incredible overreaction with the death of Patroclus, and especially in Book 22. Why he has absolutely no interest whatsoever in resolving at all this discrepancy, this crisis of faith. In Book 10, we have Diomedes and Odysseus on their night raid. They jack Dolan and they steal some ponies. In Book 11, we have Agamemnon's Aristeia, which leads Achilles to come out and see how the Greeks are doing. Not well. He sends Patroclus to Nestor to ask about it. And then we have in Book 11 the beginning of the longest day, and as well the end of it all. Because, of course, Patroclus is ultimately going to hear Nestor's advice. I will ask Achilles if I can dress up in his armor and I can go into the battle and fight. In Book 12, then we have the Trojans at the trench, the wall, the ramparts. Hector's boulder will in fact create a hole that will allow Trojans to begin to come in. It's looking like the Greeks are in fact going to have their ships set on fire and burned and therefore destroyed. Book 13, Poseidon gets involved. He takes the form of Calchas. We want to put this in our notes. God's taking the forms of humans, and in the process either motivating them, or in the case of Book 22, fooling them. Calchas will encourage. We'll see Hector taunting his brother Paris. These will be pivotal because these will be last lines for us when we meet Paris for the last time in this poem. And although he'll be there, as we've already pointed out many times, every time the death of Achilles is mentioned, we know that Hector is standing right there, right? Along with obviously Apollo. We finished Book 13 with that famous scream of Hector. We're going to have a different scream in Book 22 as, of course, Hector begins to realize it's over. Book 14, we have Hera seducing Zeus. This is the, again, marriage of sex and violence, with Ajax in the end jacking Hector with a bowler while Zeus is asleep. Book 15, we have Zeus waking up. Poseidon, he has to say to Poseidon, stop. He sends Apollo to find Hector and to heal him, and the Trojans continue to jack. In Book 16, pivotal book, Patroclus dressing in Achilles' armor. He kills Sarpedon, Zeus's son. Zeus wants to somehow see it not happen, but it does. And then, of course, we have Patroclus' Aristeia, culminating with Hector killing Patroclus, right? And in Book 17, we have the fight over Patroclus' corpse. Hector, of course, taking and putting on Achilles' armor. And at that point, we realize Book 22 is coming. Zeus says as much. Antilochus is sent to tell Achilles what Hector has done. Book 18, Achilles mourns the death of his friend Patroclus. Thetis will go to Hephaestus and get that famous shield and armor made for Achilles. Book 19, Agamemnon and Achilles, they bury all of their pasts, right? They blame both gods and women for all of their problems. Achilles puts on his armor for battle, and we've got, of course, Roman beauty having that interesting conversation with Achilles where he reminds him, soon you will die. In Book 20, Achilles' Aristeia will begin. The gods will fight. We have Aeneas and Hector both saved by Apollo. In Book 21, the book we just finished, Achilles will fight Lycaon and will kill him. It's not really fighting because Lycaon, of course, surrenders and Achilles kills him anyway. The river, again, will fight. Xanthos or Scamander will fight against Achilles. And then, of course, we have the silly gods fight as well, leading us now to Book 22. Now, just to remind again, our hope is that you read on your own. If you haven't read any of the books of the Iliad, this for sure is one that you want to read, and then use me as as a way to help you. Right? The learning theory, again, just to reemphasize, is our goal to connect new information to old information in meaningful ways. Again, we do that in our reading and our annotative work with the 3 levels of reading, where at level 1 we answer the question, what does this text say? At level 2, what does this text mean? Here, 2a, themes, messages. 2b, that rhetoric stuff, we're always looking now at symbolism and irony. We're going to see quite a bit of both of those in this. And then finally at level 3, how can I relate to this information in meaningful ways? That is to say, at 3a, can I relate to other texts, as we've just done, to kind of assume everything for the first 21 books that we've looked at, and then, of course, everything else. And then finally, can we own this text in some way personally? Okay? All right, let's now do a real quick, brief review of Book 22 before we get into the lines themselves. First, we're going to have Apollo taunting Achilles, right? Why are you chasing me? Because Achilles is out running after Apollo. And Apollo will tell him, I fooled you. This will be one of the motifs of this book, so let's put it in our notes. The Trojans, he says, now are safe inside of the harbor, and Achilles says, you robbed me of my clothes, my glory. right? And later, this is the exact same thing Athena's going to do to Hector to fool him, right? Priam sees Achilles coming, and he begs Hector to come in. Save yourself in Troy. Hecuba, his mother, powerful scene. She disrobes. She holds her old withered breast out for her son. And she says, will you at least remember that I took care of you and fed you from your birth, and please just come in. Pity me. It's a powerful scene, right? We have Hector's soliloquy, right? The question, go into Troy and live with the shame because, of course, Polydamas said, we need to get back to the walls of Troy. He admits he was wrong, or fight and win and die and gain Kleos, right? Or try parley, he thinks maybe. Maybe I can give Helen back and give a bunch of money back, but he knows none of it's going to work. He's ready to go to fight against Achilles, and then he freaks out. And he runs past the Scamander, past the river, where we're told women used to wash their clothes back in a different time. It'll be a pivotal scene for us as we study it. 4 times around Troy they will run. Finally, Zeus will ask, should we let Hector go? Athena says no. He pulls out his scales at line 250, and the fate of Hector is going to drop, and that's the end of it, right? Athena's then work and deception will begin. She goes to Achilles and says it's time. To Hector, she goes disguised as Diphibius, Hector's brother. Notice, not Paris. And he says, or Athena says, I'm with you. The cunning lie, it's called at line 230 or 293. We then have the famous conversation between Hector and Achilles. Hector will say, hey, let's make a pact. We'll do nice things to each other's bodies. Achilles will say, you are unforgiven. Reminding us of Clint Eastwood's famous movie, Unforgiven. Reading the Iliad and then watching that film, for those of you that know that film, that Academy Award film, it is a compelling study, no question. Achilles will say, there can be no pact, no peace between men and lions, between wolves and lambs. This will, of course, be a very, very disturbing passage for us as we think about things like conflict resolution in the history of the world and the United Nations. Is it true that sometimes we can't gain peace? And then, of course, we have the fight. It is kind of anticlimactic when we get to the fights. There's not a lot here. Athena will cheat Hector, right? Hector will realize when he turns to look for his help and Diphibius is gone, he realizes it, and he says it at line 350, my time has come. It's over, right? Achilles knows the one weakness because Hector is in his old armor, right at the throat area, and in fact, that's exactly how he kills him, right? In his dying breath, Hector will say, please return my body. Achilles will say, I could eat you raw. There is no way so inhuman, right? Hector then will say that Paris and Apollo in his dying moments, and of course, where are both of they? Apollo has abandoned Hector, and of course, Paris is nowhere to be found at the end of all these books, right? But Hector says it. They will both destroy you at line 423. Similarly, of course, Patroclus said the same thing, you'll remember, to Hector at the conclusion of that contest. We finally have the aftermath. The Greeks will come up and they'll stab the body of Hector over and over again now that it's dead, which just shows them to be a kind of demeaning mob, and of course makes Hector even that much more heroic, right? Then we have Achilles saying, first, hey fellas, let's attack Troy and let's just take the city. And then he remembers, no, let's go back and let's bury Patroclus, probably remembering that it was Poseidon who told him in the river when he was saving him, after you kill Hector, go back to the ships. He does the unthinkable, and he puts a hook through the tendons of the ankles. Note the irony of this, the Achilles heel, of course, for Achilles will be how Paris will shoot and kill him later. But he'll drag Hector's corpse so that defiling it, we're told, defiling the land of his own fathers in this process at line 476. And of course, Hecuba's mama sees it and screams. Priam, frantic to rush out to go to Achilles. Andromache, ironically, is saying, because she's not there on the walls, okay? Film portrayals of this will often show Andromache so she's watching her man get jacked. That's not how the poem tells the story. No, she's in her bedroom and she's putting together a hot bath for her husband to come back when she hears the screaming, and she says, oh no, and she runs we're told that when she realizes it at line 550, her veil drops off of her as she faints. Kradimna is the Greek word for veil, and it's a powerful word because it plays a double meaning. It can be both veil, it can also mean the ramparts or the walls of a city. And in the moment when her Kradimna falls, of course, we're understanding as well that Troy will fall. Finally, at the end of book 22, just to review, we have Andromache's lament, as we'll call it, right? And she'll remind all of us that when Hector dies, everything goes away. Andromache has no help. Another meaning of the falling of the veil is that when men, of course we know this from Briseis and others in the poem, when men conquer the city, they get the women, and of course they do sexual violence on the women. And the falling of the veil in Greek mythology is often represented this way. And so she's obviously predicting that. But what about Astyanax? He'll be mentioned 2 times at the end of her lament. And at the very end, we are told that the Trojan women wail. We end book 22 then knowing it's over. Over for Hector, over for Troy, but yes, also over for Achilles. Now this book, more than any other book I would say in the Iliad, it does deserve to be read aloud, and I wish that I could just sit and read it in its entirety. I'm sorry I don't have the time to do that. Let's take a little break, and when we come back, we'll go ahead and study key lines, beginning with those opening lines. Thank you.